Thank you, Hina. And welcome to Muslim Network TV, Professor Francis Boyle.
Assalamu alaikum. Thank you for having me on.
Walaikum salam. Peace be with you. Professor Boyle is professor of law at the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign. And he has written a book on Palestine, Palestinians, and the international law. I came to know him through his passionate struggle to get genocide of Bosnia fought against and declared as a genocide. Professor, do you believe that Israel is committing war crimes right now?
Well, war crimes, crimes against humanity, and this is part and parcel of their outright campaign of genocide against the Palestinians. And in that regard, I single handedly won two world court orders for the Republic of Bosnia Herzegovina against Yugoslavia to cease and desist from committing all acts of genocide against the Bosnians. This was the first time ever that any government or lawyer had ever won two orders in one case since the World Court was founded in 1921. So, yes, I've successfully litigated genocide at the International Court of Justice. And this is outright genocide that Israel has consistently practiced against the Palestinians, not just war crimes, not just crimes against humanity, but we're talking here outright genocide.
Professor, you have been very clear in articulating that, but the Human Rights Watch and B'Tselem, who this year both came out calling it apartheid, and is apartheid a crime in the international law, and why they are stopping from calling it stopping short of calling it a genocide?
Right. Under the International Convention on the Prohibition and Elimination of Apartheid, apartheid is a crime against humanity. It says that right in there. But, you know, these organizations are Zionist oriented and they don't want to go so far as to say it's genocide because the Nazis committed genocide against the Jews. And I guess they don't want to own up to that.
So do you think you consider that to be a sort of a political decision instead of a decision based on the legal definition of international law?
Well, sure. If I spent 4 years on the board of directors of Amnesty International USA, so I know how all these human rights NGOs work. They're all highly politicized, especially when it comes to Israel and Palestine. And they are very reluctant to severely criticize Israel. To give you an example, fine, you mentioned Human Rights Watch and B'Tselem come out and say it's apartheid. Excuse me, I argued this as early as November 2000. Let me repeat that, November 2000, in a speech I gave at Illinois State University about 90 minutes down the road here, where we needed to set up a divestment, disinvestment campaign against Israel and do to Israel what we did to the genocidal racist apartheid regime in South Africa. And that started the BDS campaign. What happened was in 2005, then, members of Palestinian civil society contacted me and said, you know, you founded the divestment, disinvestment campaign against Israel. We would like to expand that campaign to boycott, divestment, and sanctions like what was done to apartheid South Africa. Would you be prepared to go in with us? And I said, sure, of course. So I'm D in the BDS campaign. But I've argued this as far back as November 2000. I guess with Human Rights Watch, B'Tselem, better late than never. You can read, you mentioned my book, Palestine, Palestinians, and International Law. That was 2003. And in 2003, in the conclusion to my book, I go through the entire anti-apartheid convention and apply it to Israel as the basis, the legal basis for what was then the divestment disinvestment campaign against Israel, which is now the BDS campaign against Israel.
Tell us this, Professor. When you were part of the Amnesty International board, was these issues came on the board discussion which you are articulating now?
Pardon me?
Were you able to ask Amnesty International when you were serving on their board to declare Israel as an apartheid regime?
The Amnesty International board, when I was on it, was almost totally Zionist and bought and paid for, and it was almost impossible to get them to do anything against Israel and on behalf of the Palestinians. I won't go through all that here, but it was pretty much hopeless between you and me.
Okay. Tell us this, Professor. Is the Biden administration, which you're saying is aiding and abetting war crimes against Israel, why you're charging Biden administration with these things?
Well, it's very clear now that 4 times in a row, the Biden administration, undoubtedly under instructions from President Biden, have thwarted the United Nations Security Council from doing anything about this situation. Under Article 24 of the United Nations Charter, to which the United States government is a party, the Security Council has primary responsibility for the maintenance of international peace and security. That obligation is certainly binding on the United States government as a permanent member of the Security Council to maintain international peace and security. And yet, 4 times in a row now, the Biden administration has stopped the UN Security Council from doing anything as recently as yesterday. So certainly this is aiding and abetting what Israel, the genocide, war crimes, crimes against humanity that Israel is inflicting upon the Palestinians today as we speak. In addition, Biden just approved the sale of over $300 million of high precision munitions, JADAMs, to Israel, which today, as we speak, the Israeli Air Force is using U.S. JADAMs to exterminate Palestinians in Gaza. You can just watch it on the television. Those are all U.S. JADAMs. And Biden has just agreed to send them more. They're running out.
So almost $700 million. So you also say, is it in what Israel is doing, using U.S. equipment to kill Palestinian? Is it against any U.S. laws?
Yes. Well, I mean, we have the violation of the United Nations Charter. We have a violation of the Fourth Geneva Convention of 1949 by the United States. All Palestinian civilians living over there in occupied Palestine, which includes Gaza, are protected persons under the Fourth Geneva Convention. And yet Israel is committing wanton violations of the Fourth Geneva Convention. I document that in my book, Palestine, Palestinians, International Law. But under Article 1 of the Fourth Geneva Convention, the United States government has an obligation not only to obey, but to ensure obedience by other contracting parties to the Fourth Geneva Convention. And the United States government under Biden now has refused to secure obedience by Israel, even though it very easily could if it wanted to. At one point, the late President Perez publicly stated, I have this admission in another book I wrote, The Palestinian Right of Return Under International Law, that Israel, he publicly says Israel's completely dependent upon the Americans. They can't do anything without our permission. So Biden could stop these massive violations of the Fourth Geneva Convention. He's refused. Indeed, in 1986, I went into the U.S. Embassy there in Tel Aviv at that time, after having spent 2 weeks traveling all up and down occupied Palestine, including Gaza, and to see all the war crimes at that time that Israel had been inflicting on the Palestinians. And I complained to the consular official there that these were war crimes, and what is the United States government doing about it? And the consular said, well, this is an internal affair of Israel, and we're not going to get involved. And I said, well, that just is not the case. The United States government is a party to the Fourth Geneva Convention. We have an obligation to ensure that Israel obeys the Fourth Geneva Convention with respect to protected Palestinians, especially when we're arming, equipping, supplying, and paying for them. Instead of responding to my legal point, he said, well, you'll just have to take that up with the State Department in Washington, D.C. In other words, he had no defense. Likewise, the United States government is Biden himself violating the Arms Export Control Act, the U.S. Arms Export Control Act, that prohibits the use of U.S. weapons except in legitimate self-defense under Article 51 of the United Nations Charter. That is not the case here. The World Court has already rejected that argument by Israel in its advisory opinion on the wall. There is also a military defense transfer agreement between the United States and Israel specifically that says U.S. weapons can only be used in legitimate self-defense under Article 51. That's being violated, and Biden's letting them get away with it. All U.S. Military equipment under the Arms Export Control Act and our military supply agreement should be immediately cut off. Biden's refused to do it. We cut it off for a period of time. Obama did with El-Sisi. And then likewise, the Leahy Amendment after Senator Leahy, that any military unit found to be in violation, gross violation of fundamental human rights, must be cut off from U.S. military assistance. Clearly, that's what the Israeli Air Force is doing now. Just turn on the TV for the last 9 days, and they're just blowing the heck out of Gaza and civilian infrastructure and the people. We now have 220 dead Palestinians, 10,000 injured. Hospitals are overflowing. So those are just beginners for U.S. Domestic and international laws that the Biden administration is violating here.
Professor Boyle, is it possible for U.S. citizens or U.S. organizations to somehow use the U.S. judicial system to achieve the compliance with the U.S. Arms Control Act, Export Act?
It's pretty much hopeless. I've been involved in a lot of litigation here in the United States concerning the Palestinians, and the U.S. Court system is hopelessly Zionist. So I wouldn't see anything coming of such a lawsuit. No.
So that leaves the International Court of Justice. Have you ever considered doing for Palestine what you have done for Bosnia?
Yes, I have repeatedly. Back in 1997, I was in Gaza to celebrate the 10th anniversary of the Intifada. And I personally gave my proposal to President Arafat himself to sue Israel for genocide at the International Court of Justice and to seek a temporary restraining order to stop them. I also offered to sue the United States government for aiding and abetting Israeli genocide against the Palestinians. President Arafat said he'd consider it, but he did not hear back from him on that one. And then when he was murdered by the Israelis, Sharon, President Abbas was elected by the PLO executive committee to take his place. And I then submitted my proposal to President Abbas, which he has now. Whether he decides to do this, I don't know. Yeah, I'm just a lawyer. He's the president of the state of Palestine.
Do you think international law has enough teeth to stop its violators?
Well, let me put it this way: as when Dr. Haider Abdel Shafi, head of the Middle East peace negotiations, put me in charge of drafting the Palestinian counteroffer to Oslo. And I drafted it, and then I had to argue it there with the peace team. And there was a very high level PLO official there. I won't mention his name. And I said, we have to insist here that the Fourth Geneva Convention be obeyed in this document. And he said to me, well, Professor Boyle, what good has the Fourth Geneva Convention ever done me and my people? And I said right there in front of the whole delegation, I said, without the Fourth Geneva Convention, the Zionists would have stolen all of Palestine by now and expelled most of your people in another Nakba. So, I can't say that international law is going to solve everything. It isn't, but it certainly prevents a bad situation from becoming worse. Look at the work I did for the Bosnians. I'm not here to toot my own horn, but I single-handedly won those 2 world court orders for them. President Izetbegovic instructed me to sue Britain for aiding and abetting the Yugoslav genocide against the Bosnians. I disrupted the Owen Stoltenberg plan that would have carved the Republic of Bosnia-Herzegovina up into 3 little bitty pieces, destroyed their statehood under international law, robbed them of the United Nations membership, and subjected 1.5 to 2 million more Bosnians to ethnic cleansing. We already had 2 million Bosnians subjected to ethnic cleansing. So I stopped all that. Bosnia is still there today. They are a UN member state. Yes, the people still suffer terribly in Bosnia. Yes, half the country is still controlled and dominated by a gang of genocidal maniacs. But without international law, Bosnia wouldn't be there today. And, I shudder to think how many Bosnians would be dead. When I argued at the World Court, we had 200,000 dead and 40,000 raped women. So you could at least double that. So sure, international law doesn't solve anything, but it does help.
Thank you so much, Professor Boyle, for your time and for your service for humanity.
Well, thank you very much, and my best to your audience there. Thank you.
Assalamu alaikum.
Yeah.
Back to you.